Testing 1, 2, 3. Test number 2 for eScribe.
Start our committee meeting. Well, good morning again, everyone. I'd like to call us to order. This is the 19th meeting of the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee of this term of council. Good to see everyone today. We have not met since June, so it's been a few months, so good to see everyone here today. The city of Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nations people. They have been inhabitants and stewards of these lands for millennia, and we honor and recognize them. I would like to turn to the committee coordinator to take a roll call, please.
Councillor Bradley,
Here.
Councillor Desroches, Councillor Devine. Here. Councillor Dudas,
Ici.
Councillor Hubley. Here. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Luloff.
Good morning.
Conseillère Plante.
Hello.
Councillor Skalski. Vice Chair Hill.
Present.
And Chair Brockington.
Here.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay. Do we have any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. We have two sets. One is from meeting 18, our last meeting, Monday, the 23rd of June, 2025. And the other set is the joint meeting with the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee, meeting minutes 1, and that was from the meeting of May 15th, 2025. Any issues or concerns with those minutes? Seeing none, are those, is it carried or received?
Received.
Thank you. All right. We have 3 responses to inquiries from members of council. Problematic properties, new security features at City Hall, and review of driving school operating restrictions within city limits. I'm not aware of any member wanting to hold those. So I'm not seeing anyone wave at me online or in person, so we'll move on. So the 2 substantive items on our agenda today both have presentations from our staff. The first will be the 911 annual report for 2024, and that will be followed by the landscaping regulatory review. So we'll hold those matters now. Item 6 is the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 6 October 2025. No speakers, no written submissions on this matter. Is this report received? Received? Thank you. We'll get to notice of motion at the end of the meeting. At the very end, other business is when I will be moving a motion to support for the establishment of a national fire administration. So I'm just flagging this now for members to make them aware of when we'll deal with this. We will deal with that item under other business. And Vice Chair Hill will take the chair at that point. Okay, so let's come back to our main items now. Item 5 is the 911 annual report for 2024. It's good to see Acting Director Chapman before us today, as well as Director Gooding. So we'll start with the Acting GM.
Good morning and thank you, Chair. So we'll turn it over to Director Gooding.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this morning. C'est toujours un plaisir d'être ici et d'avoir l'opportunité de présenter notre rapport annuel sur les services d'appel au 911. Next slide. Before we jump into the 2024 highlights, we thought it would be a good idea to remind everyone of the scope of what we're reporting on this morning, which is quite narrow. When someone in Ottawa calls 911, they are transferred to the Ottawa Police Service at 474 Elgin, where an operator will ask them if they need police, fire, or paramedics. The caller will then identify their need. And that's really the scope, that initial call intake of what we're reporting on today. So just a reminder that we're not talking about dispatch or response. In terms of call volume in 2024, ce qu'on a vu était que le nombre d'appels au 911 a diminué par rapport à 2023, ce qui n'était pas une surprise. On a partagé l'année passée que en 2023, il y a eu un problème logiciel temporaire qui a eu comme résultat une augmentation d'appels erronés au 911. Mais ce problème a été identifié et résolu en 2023. So like I just said in French, we did see less calls in 2024 than in 2023, but we're not willing to declare that any sort of trend because 2023 was an outlier year. There was a glitch affecting mobile devices across North America that resulted in erroneous calls to 911. And that impacted the city along with many other jurisdictions across the region. And so we'll be monitoring call volume going forward to look at what the trends really are. We also wanted to highlight that 2024 was the first full year in which we had our intercity call transfer function in place. So residents in Ottawa can call 911 and ask to be transferred to any 911 service in North America. And that's proving more popular than we had envisioned. It's used approximately 75 to 80 times a month. Many of those calls are for wellness visits for people's loved ones and other places. And in 2024, for that initial call intake function, there were 3 complaints recorded, one of which was due to an operator error where someone was erroneously put on hold, and that was addressed at the time. Next slide. So the service level objective is our performance metric for which we get the most scrutiny. And that makes sense, but we always want to contextualize the results every year. So in 2024, 91% of calls to 911 were answered within 6 seconds, which is a really good outcome. That's a fast response. It is shy of our target, though, of 97%. As we've been discussing at this committee for a couple of years now, though, our performance metric was put in place decades ago and appears to be unique to Ottawa. It's quite rigid. Most 911 services have adopted the industry standard set by NENA. If Ottawa were to adopt that industry standard, we would meet or exceed it every year. We've also mentioned that we've been doing a service review of our 911 call intake function, and that's in the process of being finalized. And one of the things we are looking at is the service standard, especially as we get ready to migrate to next generation 911, which is that end-to-end digital service. Whenever, we transition to something new and adopt new infrastructure, it makes sense to align with what other jurisdictions are doing. And as part of that, like I said, we are thinking about that service standard. Next slide. So this is actually our last slide, and it's just a quick summary of the look ahead for the current year and into 2026. As I mentioned, we are moving towards that end-to-end digital infrastructure called Next Generation 911. At some point in 2026, there'll be some public communications indicating that the Ottawa Police Service and then the Ottawa Fire Services have migrated to that network. The Ottawa Paramedic Service is migrating under the auspices of the Ministry of Health. So they'll be migrating separately. But what we want to do today is use this forum to let you know that when we do that migration, we need to manage expectations, because at the outset, there will be no difference in client service to Ottawa residents. They'll be interacting with 911 the same way they always have. As we stabilize a new technology, and make sure that it's ready to progress to new capabilities, you'll see us evolving and offering new types of services in 911 that weren't available previously because the infrastructure didn't support them. But we'll make those announcements and help residents through that when the time comes. So like I said, in the short term, it's that migration to the new platform, which will look like business as usual for Ottawa residents. As I mentioned earlier, we are also finalizing our service review. Et comme toujours, notre but est de travailler avec le service de police de la ville d'Ottawa afin de fournir un service à la clientèle optimale pour les résidents de la ville. So with that, I'm going to conclude and I think hand it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Gooding, for your presentation. Always appreciate to get the data and information. Colleagues, there are no delegations on this matter. We did receive one written submission from Mr. Michael Wood, which is in the shared drive for everyone to look at. And now questions for staff. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Beth, for the report. And always, thank you to our EPPS staff for demonstrating once again that the standards that we strive for often exceed industry standards. And I just wanted to ask a question about that. So you mentioned that 911 is going to be going through a service review, and I just wanted to forgive me if you already mentioned this in your briefing, but will that service review have within its scope any exploration of whether or not to align our higher than NENA standards with NENA standards?
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair. Before I answer it, I was remiss in my introduction. I forgot to introduce Mr. Eric Janis, who's sitting beside me. Sorry about that. Eric manages our 911 comm center at the Ottawa Police Service, and he's here both for moral support and to contribute to any answers, especially technical ones. And so my apologies, Eric. In terms of the 911 service review, we're looking at all aspects of our call intake function, including that service level objective. And definitely, Councillor Devine, we are determining whether it makes sense to align with the NENA standard, which is adopted by most jurisdictions in North America. Right now, because we're not on the same standard, it is a little bit harder for us to do benchmarking. We just are in a sort of class onto ourselves in that regard. And so that's one of the considerations that we're looking at.
I've got two more follow-up questions to that. So kind of with, in response to your comment about benchmarking, do we have any way of demonstrating that our ability to deliver above the NENA standards, where I think you said right now, 91% of calls answered within 6 seconds, as opposed to the NENA standard of 15 seconds. Do we have any way of tying our higher standards, not just to better service, but to decreased consequences? Like the fact that we can respond to calls that much sooner, are we getting more people directed to, are we solving problems faster in a way that has a tangible safety benefit on the community?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. It's an interesting one, but also a difficult one for us to answer. I mean, there are obviously benefits to having a quick answer from 911, but in terms of determining whether or not resources need to be dispatched and what type of response is necessary, that's still going to require follow-up and discussion with the appropriate emergency services. So for example, for the paramedic service with their new MPDS system, they'll be asking quite a bit of questions to triage the nature of the call. And so I'll see if Eric wants to add anything, but it's difficult to quantify whether that initial call intake has any significant impact on response.
Well, perhaps before Mr. Janis responds, let me try a different question. Does the fact that we perform to a level higher than the NENA standard, does that take more resources? Does that end up costing more in terms of staffing than if we were to only strive for and meet the NENA standard?
Thank you for the question. And I can confirm that we are working on our service review with a consultant, and some of their analysis has shown that the more rigid the standard, the more staffing resources required.
And the only reason I'm asking, as you just said, by striving for that higher standard, it certainly may end up costing us more. I don't really have any issue with that if that leads to greater delivery of safety standards. If, however, by striving for that higher standard, it doesn't necessarily translate into more lives saved or something to that effect, then I just I'm not looking to question it. I'm just looking to find out more about it. So I guess I'm trying to see a correlation between the increased cost for meeting that standard and an increased service outcome. Perhaps that's a question for later.
No, we agree. And this is, like I said, a good component of the analysis that we're doing for our service reviews. So we'll have more to report.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up, I guess, from one of the comments that Councillor Devine was making about the standards that we currently have set, I would just be curious if you had any background that gets us to why the city's standard is so high. Certainly, it's good to have high standards, but when there's an industry standard across the board that's lower than where we're at, that does get into resource questions, that does get into standardization questions, and so I'm just curious why we're shooting for such a high target. Not that we wouldn't want to.
I'll take this one. So thank you much for the question, Mr. Chair. I have the privilege and the curse of having been with the Ottawa Police for a significant amount of time and have seen the history of this agreement. I can tell you that there is no answer to that question. It was determined in the late 1980s, and at that time was actually 98% of 97%. And it was changed, and there was no logic behind it because I actually saw it to 97. So there was no matrix, there was no metrics, there was no data that was used to come up with that change, nor is there reasoning for this initial level of service. The reason why it was determined is completely lost to history at this point. There is no records as to how and why it was determined in that way.
Okay, I appreciate the frankness of that. Maybe it's premature to ask the question then, because I know you're doing your review, but in that process, do you think that realigning the standard with other municipalities or a broad industry standard is a goal that would be good for the purposes of kind of strategic alignment, or are we simply satisfied that we've done it this way for a long time and it fits the Ottawa need?
I can speak a bit to that, and thank you much for the question, Mr. Chair. Right now, I can tell you that public safety and Ottawa Police have been aligned in making the right decisions for the right reasons. The issue that we often come up or face is the fact that we're very much an outlier. It's hard to compare ourselves to other agencies and see how truly good we are doing. If you look at other cities that have a very much lower service level agreement that do not meet their goal, and then if you discuss that Ottawa is not doing it either, if you don't really look at the data, you would assume that we're both at the same level, while in fact, the city of Ottawa's criteria is significantly higher. So I think ultimately we always try to align with the industry because there's a reason why there are standards. And ultimately lowering the standard doesn't mean that we're sacrificing public safety. The goal is always to answer every call as quick as we can. The service level objectives are essentially that objectives that we try to meet, but we don't work less because the objectives are lower. It's just a different way to measuring standards or performance.
That makes sense, and I appreciate that because, you know, if we can't answer the question of why the standard is what it is, then we probably need to look more broadly at other comparables and to the industry standard to do that. So I appreciate that, and I would just like to highlight for my colleagues, Mike Wood from my ward, he did put forth a written delegation. He had wanted to join today because he's been a tireless advocate on issues of 911 and the coordination across many cities. And I just wanted to highlight my appreciation for the work that he did on that and the content of that letter, which I would encourage all of you to take a look at. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Desroches.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. From time to time, I hear from residents in the newer parts of my ward. So these are streets that are under construction. They're just fresh in terms of being added to our road network. And they're concerned that if there is an emergency, that the fire, paramedics, police wouldn't be able to find their home because it's so new. So can you speak to how streets get added to your database so that when people call in, even if it's the first house on the street, that you're able to respond? Councillor Hill will, I'm sure, agree with me because he's got a lot of that kind of growth where these are not even blue signs, they're like wooden signs. So it creates the impression that they're in the frontier of the city and perhaps at risk. So can you provide some assurance, please?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. It's an excellent one, and it helps us to highlight that there's a whole team of people within the city who work behind the scenes on 911, but who may not be obvious, including in our planning and our rec, culture, and facility services. So when new streets are developed, they are added to an internal city database that we keep live and update all the time. And it's just a generic process that has been in place for many years and that we do very well. And so residents can rest assured that no matter how new their street is, it's in our database and available to first responders.
Thank you for that assurance. I appreciate that, and so do the residents. Thank you. That's all, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Desroches. Any other questions from colleagues? I'll just point out that I'm pleased with the overall response. I think it's important for this committee and the public to have an understanding of the volume of 911 calls, the response to those calls, which is excellent. 1,053 calls a day is quite substantial when you think about it, when you break it down on a daily basis. And 91% in 6 seconds is excellent. So I'm in favor of standardization of data. If we're moving in that direction, that certainly has my support. And I appreciate staff's work to get this report before us today. So thank you. So colleagues, the motion before us is that the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee recommend Council receive the 2024 911 annual report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much as well for being with us today. Okay, we will now transition to 5.2, the landscaping regulatory review. And I see Senior Manager Bietlo here, but Mr. Acting GM, do introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn it over to Valerie Bietlo. She's got, her and her team are going to do a brief presentation on this matter. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. The Public Policy Development Services team is here to present the results of our landscaper regulatory review. This is one of the projects that Council identified on this term of Council's bylaw review work plan. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Nous sommes ici pour vous présenter les résultats de notre revue de l'examen de la réglementation pour les entrepreneurs paysagers. Mr. Chair, today we're recommending a new business license requirement for hardscaping contractors specifically. This focused regulatory approach creates accountability for contractors working in the hardscaping area and addresses the most common concerns and the greatest issues of non-compliance that we're seeing. The proposed bylaw includes regulations to enhance and support consumer protection, and it dovetails with an education guide for residents and for contractors that we think together will address non-compliance and reduce the amount of complaints and enforcement efforts that the city receives in this area. With me today is my colleague Matthew Suatak, who's a bylaw review specialist on the PPD team, and he will present our findings and our recommendation. I'd also like to recognize the work of David Kurz, who's another bylaw review specialist on the team, who co-led this project with Matthew. And with us also today is staff from Bylaw and Regulatory Services and also colleagues from the Planning, Development and Building Department who could answer questions from a planning and a zoning perspective for this file if needed. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to Matthew.
Good morning, Chair and members of committee. Next slide, please. For this review, we initially considered a broad definition for landscape contractors and defined them as anyone who creates, alters, or maintains soft or hard landscaping features. Dans Ottawa, les entrepreneurs et les autres personnes qui font des activités de paysagement sont régis par une variété de règlements municipaux et la diapositive présente les règlements qui s'appliquent le plus fréquemment. In Ottawa, there are a variety of bylaws that regulate landscaping activity depending on the nature of the work. And on this slide are those bylaws that are most frequently applicable. Staff's review took these existing bylaws into consideration together with service request history and enforcement data around landscaping, industry consultations, and the approaches taken in other jurisdictions to determine what potential regulatory and non-regulatory approaches are needed. Next slide, please. There were three issues that placed this on the Term of Council bylaw review work plan. The first issue, the biggest source of concern in this sector, is non-compliant driveway alterations. So typically widenings, but also unauthorized connections to the right-of-way. And these run contrary to the city's zoning and private approach bylaws. In the last 3 years, there's been an average of 385 service requests a year for non-compliant driveway and road connections and approximately 100 enforcement actions a year, which can include tickets, notices to fix, or orders to fix. What we heard during our consultations with enforcement colleagues and with councillors is that the actual number of non-compliant driveways is likely higher, but many of these instances go unreported and so are not captured in the service request data. We also heard from our enforcement colleagues that these service requests are challenging to investigate and enforce in terms of both resources and in terms of time. We also know that when non-compliant driveways are installed, it's costly to remediate, and it's in addition to what the homeowner paid to install it. While it's not often that the city hires contractors to remediate, in the last year, when the Planning, Development and Building Department has had to contract out remediation work, that cost has ranged from $8,500 to as high as $30,000. The second issue is unauthorized storage of landscaping material in the right-of-way, so on the roadway, the sidewalk, the boulevard. In the last 3 years, there's been an average of 315 service requests per year, and again, many such instances go unreported. Le dernier problème est une méconnaissance des règlements municipaux et des exigences de permis pour la réalisation de travaux de paysagement. Ce manque de connaissances vaut autant pour les résidents que les entrepreneurs, ce qui nous a été confirmé durant nos séances d'engagement et de consultation. The final issue is a knowledge and awareness gap around what the city's landscaping rules and requirements are. This is a gap seen from both residents and contractors and was confirmed during our engagement. Over half of contractors and residents indicated that they lacked awareness or could use more information about what the rules are in Ottawa. Next slide, please.
Mr. Chair, our recommendation today is for a new business license requirement for hardscape contractors operating in the City of Ottawa. Hardscape contractors are those who conduct driveway paving, as well as install or alter hardscaping features like walkways and interlock on private property. This would not include, however, those who only seal or reseal driveways, as we're not seeing issues in that area. En fonction des recherches sur le sujet, de l'analyse de données et de consultations menées lors de ce dossier, Le personnel recommande un nouveau régime de permis d'entreprise pour les entrepreneurs en paysagement minéralisé exerçant leurs activités dans la ville d'Ottawa. The narrowed business license approach that we're recommending for hardscapers targets the most costly issue for the city and for residents while not capturing all landscapers in the same regulatory approach. The business license regime would include key consumer protection benefits for residents. As part of the regulations, hardscaping contractors would have to hold valid insurance. They would have to have contracts with their clients, and they'd have to identify their vehicles, among other measures. A list of licensed hardscape contractors would also be posted on ottawa.ca so consumers can see who is licensed by the city prior to entering a project. Licensing also creates accountability, Mr. Chair. Hardscaping contractors would be required to follow city bylaws as a condition of their license. If there is non-compliance, licensing creates additional administrative and enforcement tools to allow bylaw and regulatory services to deal directly with the contractor and bring them into compliance. Staff anticipate that the licensing regime could gradually reduce the number of service requests and complaints and related investigations that have to occur every year in this area. Le permis d'entreprise aidera à identifier les entrepreneurs dont les activités de paysagement minéralisé sont non conformes au règlement de la ville. Il créera un mécanisme de responsabilisation pour ces entrepreneurs et sera une mesure supplémentaire incitant à respecter les règlements de la ville. We are recommending two specific exemptions to the licensing regime. The first one is for any hardscaping work taking place as part of the construction of new residential units in the city. The purpose of this exemption is to avoid creating any impediments to the construction and delivery of new housing in the city of Ottawa. And we know that this area is not the area that causes the greatest concerns for non-compliant hardscaping. The second exemption is for hardscaping work that's taking place as part of a normal farm practice. This exemption specifically addresses and supports provincial legislation that prohibits a municipal bylaw from interfering with normal farm practices and farming operations. In terms of the licensing fee, we're recommending an annual fee of $381 plus the usual $60 admin fee that's charged to all licensing categories for a total of $441 annually. And this is equivalent to the licensing fee that's being charged for snowplow contractors. However, we recognize that some of the city's licensed snowplow contractors also do hardscaping in the summer months, and therefore we're recommending that licensees who provide both types of services in the city not have to pay that second licensing fee. So while they would both be required to obtain both licenses and meet all the requirements, they would only be charged one licensing fee. Finally, Mr. Chair, staff are not recommending or asking for any additional full-time resources to launch this new licensing regime. The revenue collected from the licensing fees will be used to offset administration and enforcement within bylaw and regulatory services existing complements and would also be used to support the summer student program. Next slide, please.
Nous avons mené de vastes consultations pour la préparation de ce rapport. Nous avons identifié et rejoint quelques 1100 entrepreneurs paysagers menant des activités de paysagement dans Ottawa, ainsi que 7 associations industrielles. Nous les avons sondés à 2 reprises et nous avons aussi réalisé un sondage auprès du public par l'entremise de participants à Ottawa. Nous avons aussi consulté les membres du conseil et nous avons eu des échanges avec des municipalités qui ont procédé à un examen de règlement similaire. To help develop our recommendation, we conducted broad consultations. We identified and reached out to 1,100 potential landscape contractors operating in Ottawa and 7 industry associations, and we surveyed them twice. We also conducted a public survey via Engage Ottawa, consulted with members of council, and engaged with other municipalities that have undertaken similar bylaw reviews. We also met with the various departments and service areas internally, with a focus on those groups that enforce regulations that intersect with landscaping work. In terms of the feedback we received, there is mixed support for the creation of a new business license from contractors, with 58% of respondents to our survey in opposition and 42% in support. From both our contractor and resident surveys, approximately 50% of respondents indicated they did not understand or at least could use more information around Ottawa's landscaping bylaw and permit requirements, and a majority supported more education materials to help meet this gap. We also learned in our municipal benchmarking that business licensing of either all landscapers or a subset of them was a common approach to promote consumer protection and to address issues of non-compliance. Next slide, please. As part of this recommended licensing regime, staff will also be developing a companion education guide. This guide would be in the form of a physical guide and also a webpage on ottawa.ca, and it would be specific to what contractors and homeowners need to know, in particular regarding permit requirements and general bylaw compliance. The guide would be created using simple, accessible language and would be able to point residents and contractors to additional resources should they have any questions. And the guide would also clarify the contractor and the homeowner's responsibility, underscoring that it is still the homeowner's responsibility for any non-compliant landscaping work that's taken place on their own private property. As part of licensing, contractors would also be required to provide a copy of this guide to their clients to ensure that it is well distributed and available for review prior to any landscaping work beginning. Le personnel croit que ce guide pourra réduire le nombre de demandes de services à l'avenir et aidera à réduire les éventuelles modifications d'entrée de cours et autres activités de paysagement en matière dure non autorisées avant leur construction. Staff anticipate that this guide could reduce future service requests and help mitigate the potential for unauthorized driveway alterations and other hardscaping and landscaping activities before they are built. Staff from Emergency and Protective Services and other departments will develop the guide over the winter with the goal of capturing all landscaping related information, including any new changes to the upcoming zoning and private approach bylaw reviews that'll be before council in Q1 of next year. The aim will be to have the guide ready in time for next landscaping season. Next slide, please. Staff recommend that the new license requirements and associated fees be implemented as of March 1st, 2026 to coincide with the start of next landscaping season and to allow for sufficient time for hardscaping contractors to become familiar with the new licensing requirements. Staff have communicated with impacted contractors to advise them of the recommendation and will continue to communicate the outcome of this review and any next steps. The licensing application and requirements will also be posted online on ottawa.ca. Thank you. Merci.
Excellent. Thank you for your presentation. And I do want to acknowledge all the work that you have invested to date. It's not as simple as us providing a direction, go amend a bylaw. It's all the research and review of best practices, consultation with the industry. There's 13 different bylaws that touch upon landscaping. So there's a lot of work that's been involved to date. And I want to thank you for getting us to this point. Colleagues, we have one delegation this morning, and I also want to draw your attention. We have two written correspondence that's also in the shared drive for you to review as well. So I call upon Mr. Jonathan Gilman. Good morning, sir. All delegations have up to 5 minutes. At the 1 minute mark, I'll just say 1 minute to give you an idea of 1 minute left, and just press the button for your microphone in front of you. There you go.
Good now. My name is Jonathan Gilman. I own a hardscaping company called Ottawa Interlock Repair. I'm not sure if there's a slide. If so, can you play the first one? I don't think there is though. I started my landscaping company at 17. I couldn't get a startup loan. My banker wouldn't even let me open a business bank account. The insurance broker I called referred me to an alternate insurer who referred me to an alternate insurer who insured me at about 4 times what I expected to be insured at. At the time, I couldn't do much, but what I could do was open a landscaping company. There was no license required. I remember when I first started out, I would count out exact change in thousands of dollars to my suppliers because they wouldn't accept checks and I wasn't old enough to get a credit card. If 17-year-old me was starting out in March 2026 versus March 2013, I, with the proposed regulations, wouldn't be able to get a landscape license. But I'm not here for myself today. Thankfully, over the past 13 years, I've built my business up slowly year over year to a place where I can easily afford a license, then the subsequent paperwork, insurance coverage, etc. I'm over 18. I can legally sign contracts. I'm not here for myself. I'm here for 17-year-old me, and I'm here for a kid I know who's starting out at 13 mowing lawns, trying to get his own landscaping company off the ground. I'm here for new Canadians who struggle enough to get by, who don't need extra paperwork to go through, people who do struggle to afford a few $100s for a license, decaling their trucks. It all adds up. When going over the materials, which were excellent and thorough, I noted that most contractors thought this license would not put a strain on them or their business. It would be easy for them to afford. And I'm one of those contractors, but I wasn't always. The contractors that aren't here are the ones I'm speaking for. The kids who can't legally sign up for this license because they're under 18. The new Canadians who do incredible work but struggle with our official languages. Most of us aren't affected. But I'm guessing you won't hear a lot from the ones who are affected because they're just busy trying to keep their businesses afloat. The intention of this license is to increase the bylaw and regulatory awareness, increase the general level of competence and hardscaping contractor in Ottawa. And I am all for that. I hold myself to a high standard, and I prefer to compete against good contractors, not fly-by-night contractors that this license is supposed to curb, landscaping pun intended. These guys cut corners and make it difficult for the honest guys. But I doubt that people who want to remain under the radar, doing cash jobs, not signing contracts, I doubt that they will get licensed as it is. I know that the young people trying to make it in landscaping, the new Canadians, the hard workers who don't have the time or knowledge for extra paperwork, they will want to get licensed, but they will not be able to or struggle to. It's a small percentage who will be affected, but to those affected, it's not such a small thing. For a 17-year-old who wants to run the best business he can, not being able to get a license and be a licensed business will kill his dreams before it starts. With all this in mind, I would propose 1 or 2 or 3 things to the committee. First of all, vote against the license and instead simply put a program in place to educate the consumer and the contractor as to the various bylaws, rules, and regulations. And this is part of the proposed plan already, which is excellent. 2, make it a voluntary license. I choose to be part of the Better Business Bureau, and I'm happy to pay their fees because I want to stand out on a list of contractors that value business ethics. 3 would be to create another exemption along with the new housing construction exemption and the farming exemption.
1 minute.
This would be for small companies, those doing below $500,000 in business. I chose that number because that's a 1 to 2 truck operation in Ottawa. These guys are just getting started, trying to support their families, not trying to scam anyone, just hard workers. These guys don't have much infrastructure, but they do really good work. And that's all. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Gilman, for your delegation. I'll just see from my colleagues if there are any questions. I don't see any hands, but thank you very much. Sorry. Pardon me? Online? Okay. I didn't see any here, but go ahead. All right, go ahead, Councillor Johnson.
Hi there. I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming out. I appreciate very much your broader perspective on entrepreneurship, and I really appreciate sort of the nuance here. I think it helps me to remind me sort of the reasons why people get into business. Even though my husband is an entrepreneur and a contractor, I don't always listen to him so good. So I can appreciate that, we can often get caught up in the enforcement aspect of it. And certainly it is challenging, to recover those costs when the compliance issue is the way it is. But you've brought forward some really interesting questions, and we'll be sure to ask staff when that time comes. So thanks for taking the time, especially since this is billable time for you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Conseiller Plante.
Oui, merci. No, I just kind of want to echo Councillor Johnson's comments about coming today. I often say the people who should be delegating at committee are not often the ones that show up because they do have things like responsibilities and billable time. So I know that's a bit of your knock in your profits today. So thank you so much for doing so. I was just wondering, do you guys have like a provincial or national standards? Like, do you have an overarching Landscapers of Canada committee? I was gonna maybe go on their website today and have a look around, but Yeah, I was just wondering if you belong to something like that or if it even exists.
There is Landscape Ontario who was quoted in the report, or consulted in the report. Landscape Ontario is something I'm a member of. As mentioned, Better Business Bureau, and there's other licensing bodies that I've gotten training from, but it's not a requirement.
Okay, and I'm just curious, do you landscape in the winter, number one? And number two, how do I keep my plants alive? Because I have a lot of problems with that very basic task. Thank you.
Hardscaping, I think you're referring to softscaping, which is not going to be affected, I don't think.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the delegation today. I found it really informative. I think it's really important for us to hear from small businesses because oftentimes I do think you get drowned out from time to time. I suspect that I will be supporting this report as it comes up, but I'm going to take into account the three things that you brought up. I'm going to probably ask some questions maybe a few years down the road on how this program is taking place. And if there are some of the concerns that you're raising that need to be adjusted or more monitored. But I just want to put to you the question of, you're at the coal face of this industry day in and day out. How big of a problem do you see in terms of non-compliant contractors that are doing things that are not aligned with city code, as that kind of compares to other types of renovation construction businesses, deck builders, other types of people out there? Because to me, this seems to be like a really strange anomaly. And I would really be interested to get your perspective on the driveway widening issue and why I think it's pervasive. And I would be interested to hear if you think it's pervasive.
It definitely is pervasive. We, as a repair company, we've been asked to remediate some of these situations. And I don't know where the numbers of 8,500 to 30,000 came up, but I don't think it's that hard to remediate things. But it is pervasive. And one thing is that we get asked to do illegal works. It's coming from the customer, the consumer more often. We've done over 2,000 jobs in Ottawa, and I've never suggested something that is against bylaw. Specifically in this area, we always say, no, we will not go that far. We will only go where we're allowed to go. Or you can request an exemption, a permit, et cetera, et cetera. I think this one in particular is noticed because of just how we're designed in Ottawa with so little space and such small driveways. So everybody says when they move into a new house, I'm going to be widening it. What can I get away with? And then it's just if someone, they just push and push until they get as much as they can. Or they'll put a front patio in, which is legal, but they're going to park on it. If they'll come in on a narrow entry because they're not widening it at the street, and they'll put a front patio in that no one will notice, so they can park, something like that. I don't see it as an anomaly. My friend who's a deck builder always has two prices, one for permitted decks and one for a deck renovation, quote unquote, that is not a renovation, but is a new deck that he's trying to get away with. And that's so common. I don't see this as an anomaly. It's just that it's outside and you don't see what's happening inside.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your delegation here today. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank
you, Vice Chair. Councillor Skalski, I had you next. Excellent. Okay. Councillor Desroches.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate that. It's always good to hear from people on the front line of things at City Hall. I'm sympathetic to your views, and I will have some questions later as well. And I think we need to keep the fees as low as possible for many of the reasons you're talking about. But I want to take you to your points on the new business people coming into the sector. And don't you think it's important that the work you did to become successful, to enter the market, don't you want to enter and have a level playing field in order to properly compete? And I think, as Councillor Hill talked about, it's quite common to see a lot of illegal work being undertaken, certainly in Riverside, South and Finley Creek. I hear about it quite a bit. Don't you want a level playing field so that you can properly compete and scratch your way and work your way to being a bigger enterprise?
I would definitely want a level playing field, but I think the point that I'm making, and I believe we spoke to this already, is for people who are just getting started, the small contractors, an extra license plus the cost of decaling a truck and making sure everything is in order and that paperwork requirement, it's not, for the smallest contractors, it's not, they can't even get on that playing field. That burden of a few $1,000s by the time you add everything up might be like, I couldn't afford my truck. I met a guy on Kijiji who agreed to give a kid a chance and sold me a truck on payments from a stranger. That's how I was able to get started. That money he didn't take from me right away, let me start. And that's what I'm talking about here, is people who are just, that few $1,000s might not seem a lot to people who are well established, but it is. And I remember what that's like. So yes, I would like that, but for the small guy, they can't even get on that field.
Thanks for the feedback. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your delegation this morning. We appreciate your time. Now, questions for staff. Councillor Skalski.
Hi, thanks so much for your review and for this proposal today. I have a question for you. You mentioned that you received mixed responses from businesses. Do you have a breakdown of how many of those businesses were small businesses that were favorable for this particular licensing regime?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, we did receive mixed feedback, and in terms of the responses that we did get, we're estimating about 2/3 were from small businesses based on the fact that they owned 5 or fewer vehicles in the survey engagement. And the support and opposition for the license was a similar split as to the overall numbers as well.
Right. The delegate just described, the possibility of a voluntary licensing process instead of mandatory licensing. I mean, licensing is one of the most heavy-handed sort of options in the regulatory toolbox. So I am curious if we've considered a voluntary licensing and just pursuing as a first step, improved education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we did. And perhaps I'll start off from the policy side and then I'll turn it over to bylaw and regulatory services to add anything. We didn't consider necessarily a voluntary approach, but we considered an education-only approach, which is similar. And we recommend against it because we are seeing non-compliance across the city. We are seeing issues where contractors are not following the city guidelines, city bylaws in particular, which is putting both them and homeowners in a difficult position. The licensing regime we're recommending today is very, very scoped. It's for hardscaping work only. So for example, landscapers that garden, landscapers that mow lawns, as the delegate was mentioning, they would not be included in this licensing regime. A small number of regulations, definitely scoped. A low-ish licensing fee is what we recommend to create accountability and bring people who work in this space into compliance. We think that dovetails with the education approach. We're not recommending one without the other. And we think we'll see over time a reduction in the amount of complaints and the reduction in non-compliance.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think that the education component is really important and will be a big factor in the success of this. Are you able to quantify the costs to the city for these gross violations? Like at the end of the day, this is likely damaging, snow removal equipment, and there's real costs that we bear as a result of this problem in the city. Do we have a number around that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't have a number that's tracked in terms of budget implications for hardscaping specifically, but there are a number of impacts, infrastructure and environment, and to enforcement as well. From an infrastructure perspective, non-compliant hardscaping leads to a reduction in snow storage space, a reduction in on-street parking, excuse me. It has potential impacts to utilities and to the infrastructure of the asphalt and the concrete itself. And from an environmental perspective, over hardscaping is often associated with a reduction in softscaping, the removal of trees, and an increase in stormwater runoff, which can have an impact on the city's wider stormwater management system. And from an enforcement perspective as well, there is a cost, and I would invite Associate Director Gravel to elaborate on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council, great question. Really, the cost when it comes to enforcement, it really depends on the type of work that was done on private property or on the road allowance, and really, the amount of time the officer takes to investigate, and then the remedial action. It's not a one-shop fits all sort of for all these. They vary depending on the actual complaint itself.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Councillor Delroche.
Thank you, Chair. I would normally have a high bar for any regulatory intervention, but I think this meets the test. I've spoken to several residents of my ward, both those that have complaints against them and those who are complaining about what they're seeing as a change in the character of the street when people are non-compliant with the bylaws. When I talk to the people who have complaints against them, oftentimes there's a lack of awareness, and they should have called before they dig, and the education is going to be a big piece of that. But what I hear is stories of, frankly, dishonest or dismissive advice from their contractors in terms of what is permitted by the city. And I think what's happening in some cases, if they can sell 10, 20, 30 more bricks, they will sell those bricks to these residents. And at the end of the day, when the job is done, it's the resident that is going to be on the hook for the remedial work. It's the new homeowner that's going to buy that house that's going to be on the hook that the previous homeowner did. So I think we are seeing a big problem, certainly in Riverside South and Finley Creek. What really gets my goat is when the trees come down too. That is, I think, just terrible. And we just had a report on the canopies in our wards, and obviously in my ward, with the growth that we've seen, we've got some work to do to maintain and grow the trees there. And I see streets that over 10 years that the trees have flourished, and it really is a great street. So I am very troubled when I see the trees come down for road work. A few questions. One is on the fees and the work that we've done to keep it as low as possible. I'd ask you during the briefing to this meeting if we could maybe have a holiday in the first year. I was debating that, but I was convinced by the argument you have. So I want to talk, if you could just speak to grinding these fees as low as possible and why a holiday is really not possible in the first year. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll start off and then throw it to operational staff. Yes, we don't recommend a fee holiday, Councillor. The fee that we're recommending is on a cost set-off or cost recovery basis only to get revenues to use internally within bylaw and regulatory services to administer and enforce this new regime, and to supplement the summer student program, and bylaw staff can speak more to that. This regime we're recommending coming to force on March 1st. So the first year of this new regime would see a smaller fee for contractors in any event, because they'd only be charged from March 1st. So it's a bit of a smaller fee. And then it would be an annual fee going forward. This is not over and above cost recovery or cost set-off. It really is just to meet the city's costs. We know that fees get approved by council every year as part of the budget process. Should there need to be a change in the fee, staff could come forward at that point and signal that to council. So we really are taking the example from snowplow contractors. Regulations are similar, and that's what we based the fee on. But I would invite my colleagues to add any operational information as well.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, really for this first sort of year that we would be enforcing the licensing regime, we would be using those funds from the license to actually bolster our student program so that we can actually be out there and monitor this and actually get sort of the word out that the license is required and explain the requirement or the impacts if you do not get a license. So we do need staff out there to actually be able to enforce this.
Thank you. As I mentioned, when I talk to residents who are in a situation of non-compliance, I ask them, did you call the city? Did you talk to someone who is knowledgeable about what is allowed? Oftentimes the answer is no. So a big part of it needs to be a splash of education that the residents need to call the city if they're going to do any type of work. Can you speak to the big splash that this is going to have in addition to regulating on the education side with the public so that they do the right thing right from the bat?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, Councillor, that's the intention of the companion education guide, is to explain all of the rules around landscaping and hardscaping in particular in the city to residents in a way that's clear and accessible and points them toward additional resources should they have any questions. The goal of the guide, along with the license, is to prevent these situations from happening in the future. And so the guide will be speaking to the various landscaping activities in the city and informing residents of what they need to know, what's most important, and where they can get more information should they need it.
Okay, thank you. Last question is on signage. I spoke earlier at committee on these new streets, new homes that are being built. Many of these streets are littered with illegal signs for various contractors. They're attached to the mailboxes, they're attached to the light posts, they're attached to the stop signs, and it's really out of control. With this regulatory regime, would we have some ability to influence some of these contractors who are advertising? I would add, one of the contractors had a Better Business Bureau ad on their illegal sign that was littering the community. So it's a bit of the wild, wild west out there in some of these newer parts of the city. Would we be able to regulate or make some interventions with some companies that are in these sign wars that are taking place in the newer subdivisions?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Currently, we do have bylaws that regulate signs on city property. Now, in situations of non-compliance, the license actually gives us that extra tool so that for situations of continued non-compliance, we can actually put conditions on that license to ensure that those violations do not continue to occur in the future.
Thank you very, very much. I'm going to support this. I think it meets the high test for a regulatory intervention. I've heard too many and seen too many incidences where there is non-compliance. I've heard too many stories of really unscrupulous market conduct by some landscapers. I think this is one piece to it, and the education is another big part of it. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lulaf and then Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madam Bietlow, I appreciate the great work that's been done on this, and truly appreciated the time that we spent together as you and your team walked me through this. And I also appreciate how low of a barrier that your team is setting, and the exemption for those who do hardscaping, landscaping, and also snow removal. I think that is incredibly conscientious, and really do appreciate your understanding that many of these groups do, as both activities are quite seasonal. I don't know that there's a whole lot of people installing hardscaping in the middle of winter. I think the snow would probably prove quite challenging. So recognizing that these are two seasonal and often connected works, I think was quite astute on your team's behalf, and appreciate that very much. We heard from a delegation today a suggestion to look at a threshold of a certain amount earned by a company. I think that he had suggested five. I think he had suggested five. Was it $500,000 or $50,000? I can't quite remember at this point. But had your team considered a threshold so as not to disproportionately, I suppose, penalize, despite the fact that it is quite a reasonable number that you've chosen, startup companies or companies that are being run by entrepreneurs that haven't quite reached the age of majority?
Mr. Chair, no, we're recommending a licensing regime that applies to any contractor doing work in this space in the city of Ottawa. As we've explained, there is widespread issues with non-compliant hardscaping, causes problems for homeowners, it causes problems for city infrastructure, among other issues. So we recommend that any contractor doing work in this space comply with these regulations, meet these foundational consumer protection measures, and frankly have to play ball with the education guide and provide the education guide to their clients. We think these measures together will be the most helpful. In terms of administering a low threshold license, I'm not aware that the city's ever done that. It could be challenging to establish what those benchmarks are and then get that information, get that sort of proof of below threshold or above threshold. So no, it's not something that we considered. I would turn it over to bylaw staff though to see if they have any other comments on how this type of separate approach could work. It's not something that we recommend right now.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, in a situation like this, we typically would not see too many hardscaper contractors under the age of 18. Now, in these situations where we see minors doing this type of work, it would probably be in situations where they're cutting grass, raking leaves, smaller work that would not require a license of this nature.
Okay. If perhaps the situation arises that there's just a particularly industrious 17-year-old who wants to start his own hardscaping company one summer, is that something that bylaw and regulatory services would be open to discussing with them so that they might be able to obtain such a license should that occur? Or would you require, perhaps, a co-signer or something like that? Just what would the mechanics of that look like should you receive an application from somebody who's under the age of majority?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, great question. Something that we did think about while the delegation was speaking to this. Again, the concern is, there is that requirement that they must be 18 years of age to obtain a license. Part of that is because they need to be 18 to be able to sign a contract.
Yeah.
There's other concerns that we have that, we talked about consumer protection and the best interest of the residents of Ottawa as well, is that, it's desirable for those residents to ensure that, whatever company they have on their property has proper insurance as well. So I think it would be a challenge for somebody under the age of 18 to get in the proper insurance to be able to operate. What I would say is that often what we see where, between the ages of 15 and 18, where they're helping out with these type of businesses, they might be a partner in the business, but it's usually a family-run business. So it's usually a mom or a dad who's operating the business, and they would make application for the license, and we would consider them as the owner of the business and the applicant. And as long as they have proper insurance and they're over the age of 18, that wouldn't be an issue.
Okay, no, really appreciate those answers. I know it's not fun to deal with what ifs, but appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for your questions. Councillor Johnson and then Hill.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to explore a little bit more the exemption for new build homes. Can you help sort of unpack how new home, I appreciate the hesitancy to put any new regulation on home building, but how will we ensure compliance with all of our other 12 bylaws that touch this one in the absence of a landscape license in that case?
Mr. Chair, even if the exemption applies for hardscaping occurring during the construction of a new residential building, that construction and what's being built is still subject to all the other city bylaws. The exemption only relieves the necessity of getting a license for that particular work. We know that many of the construction for new residential units are governed by development agreements and the other bylaws, as I say. So when Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association raised this concern with us, we took it very seriously. Again, the aim is not to create impediments in these particular circumstances to the delivery of these new residential units, while still, and we feel comfortable recommending that because we know there's still the underpinning of development agreements that have terms and conditions, that have securities, and all the other bylaws that can be applied if needed, if there is non-compliance.
Thank you for that. I'm less concerned about greenfield development because it doesn't impact College Ward, but certainly infill development, we have seen an uneven degree of adherence to the city's right-of-way and private approach bylaws. We've seen irrigation systems installed right up to the road. We've seen ditches be filled in, other types of behaviors that have really impacted the stormwater management in some of our communities that are seeing big infill. So I guess I just wanted to make sure today, I do support the licensing. I personally was trying to, well, I mean, not to overshare or anything, but this is a conversation that I've been having in my house, whether or not I can widen my driveway. And I was soliciting quotes for this. So I have and I had a very different response from different contractors that I was asking about the regulations. Some were less concerned. Some asked me, how much I knew about it, right? And so I am waiting. My spouse is annoyed that I'm waiting because we can see other people on the street across from us widening their driveway at this very moment, right? So we have, the new zoning bylaw that will allow for everything pre-2007 to be accepted as legitimate exemptions to our new rules, which will be perhaps clearer or perhaps even more complicated for people to understand. And then we will have, this license come through, but there will be exemptions for new builds. And so I become nervous that there are gaps that we will still, there will inevitably be gaps. And so just to impress upon staff, the development review process and those development review officers working in tandem with building code and bylaw are so important for the integrity of this overall system. And they require, regular education and regular training from those departments that are touching their bits and pieces, because they will be the ones who will be ultimately accountable in the absence of some of these other bureaucracies, which I think is streamlining housing, but does put added pressure on a department that already faces a lot of pressure. So that's my caution here, that department that will hold a lot of authority for all of these other pieces that residents are expecting in those new developments infill. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Did you want to respond to anything that the councillor said, or was that just getting that out there? Did you want staff to respond?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councillor. We're aware of, the changes that are coming with the zoning bylaw and the private approach or right of entry bylaw. At this point, we are trying to sort of, ensure that the proper education is provided to these contractors so they're aware of what they can do, and they can provide this education to the homeowners that are requesting this. There are many rules out there when it comes to hardscaping on private property and city road allowance. And it also depends on the configuration of your property as well. Some with townhomes have very small frontages, where others with single family homes have very large frontages. There is a difference between both as what you can do. So really the education piece is key in, providing what is permitted through us hardscapers.
Thank you, Councillor. Vice Chair Hill and then Councillor Dudas.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to start by acknowledging, certainly this has been a tough file for me to get to know and understand, because it is pervasive. It's extremely problematic, especially when we have, new builds that are getting driveways widened. We have people who bought a house 10 years ago whose driveway was widened in 2012. There were different policies at different phases and times. And so we're dealing with an issue where there are selective people who are being enforced based on our system of bylaw. There are other people who are not being enforced. There's a perception that this is an unfair process. There is the reality that there are flood risk issues that go into communities where we see the whole of, 7 townhouses in a row have their front yards paved. We have the reality that, widening driveways leads to a reduction in on-street parking capacity. But we also have the reality that there are some mechanisms to actually do this legally and legitimately and appropriately. It's just the problem is that oftentimes it's not done so. So that's my long-winded way to say thank you very much to the whole team that looked at this complicated piece. It would have been my preference to have seen kind of one omnibus that dealt with this whole thing. But I do recognize that it's complex. I do recognize this is the first step in looking at a licensing process that will allow some level of accountability in a world where it's a bit the Wild West and we don't have that accountability. So here's my question. We have this report, which you're looking for committee to approve. We're going to move forward with a licensing regime. Later this fall, we have the zoning bylaw that's going to come forward, which will inform this process. We're also going to have the private approach process, which will inform this process. It would be my assumption that it would be kind of a natural fit in maybe 18 months or 2 years or something like that. Once those 2 key documents that will inform this come into effect, that we'll do a reassess to see if the actual licensing permitting process is a requirement, given that there may be other regulatory components that come out of those other reports that might actually solve the broader parts of this problem.
Mr. Chair, yes, absolutely. Staff can monitor the level of service requests, complaints, the nature of the service requests, and the enforcement actions that will be taken post-adoption of this licensing regime, particularly when the new rules for zoning and private approach come in. Again, the education guide will be up to date with those new rules, so we'll be able to assess the efficacy of licensing plus education going forward.
Can you speak to how you're communicating to individuals that have enforcement-related deadlines that are coming up in the next few months in terms of obligations to remediate or reverse widenings or face charges? What is our status right now, given that we have a number of policy considerations before us?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Understanding that, everybody's aware of some regulatory changes that could be coming in different, from the zoning bylaw to the right-of-way bylaw, private approach bylaw, this new licensing regime. It's something that we're working on with our staff right now to ensure that, our officers on the front lines are, aware of these regulation changes that are being considered, although not in a bylaw yet. So when we're investigating these complaints of driveway widenings or excessive hardscaping in the front yards, we are considering what we know to be the recommendations that are likely to be coming forward in the very near future. So we're trying to educate the homeowner, contractors, when we get an opportunity to speak to them. And we are using discretion when we're doing enforcement. So I think what you're going to see for the next little while is that we may be deferring some of these enforcement matters to the spring of 2026, just to see what the regulations are and when they're put in place, and then reassess to see whether there's compliance or not at that point. So, we don't want to be in situations where we're being heavy-handed or, enforcing bylaws that exist now that we know are going to change, and then asking somebody to reinstate their front yard when we know that that's likely going to be permitted come, the end of Q1 next year. So those are all things that officers are, using their discretion and doing that assessment while they do their investigations. So we're still taking the complaint, we're still investigating. And again, I'd like to take the opportunity to say that, we've had discussions about, whether enforcement or this licensing regime is actually necessary, keeping in mind that, it's speaking from experience. I mean, we set up these programs without enforcement to support these programs. They're set up to fail. We need enforcement. I know it's not always popular, but we have to ensure that there's a fair playing field for all contractors and all residents across the board. We are a complaint-based service, and that's but as recently with all the stuff in the media, it's we get more and more complaints. So to answer your question specifically, yes, we're taking all that into consideration and we're using discretion. So there's unless it's an obvious violation that we know is not going to change come Q1 next year when the new regulations come into play, we're holding off on enforcement action.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll just reaffirm that this policy has pinched many, like hundreds of people in my ward alone. And I very much appreciate the attention and care that's gone into this complex process. And I will continue to work with you over the coming months as we mature those other policies in order to get to the best place. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Next, we have Councillor Dudas and then Councillor Devine.
I don't know that I have much to say. My colleagues have asked some such important and essential questions. I did want to just speak from experience. When you first briefed us on what you were proposing, I know I was not particularly keen on having more of a layer of regulations and licensing on our local businesses. But having spoken to so many residents in my ward and hearing their stories of being caught up in confusion and then enforcement on their end, where they've, instated hardscaping, done something beautiful with their property on the advice of a contractor, then all of a sudden they have to redo it at their own expense, or they're facing, other actions without having known. I think that this is the right thing to do. At the moment, it's a bit of a Wild West out there. As my colleague said, you get one contractor, they'll say one thing, you get another one, they'll say the other. Some will say it's up to you as the consumer to know the rules. Some will say, oh, I know the rules, it's okay. And you don't know where you fall. Some residents will do the due diligence and find out. Others will just assume on good faith. And I'm not keen on allowing good faith to rule this. So I do think this is the right thing to do. I also agree with my colleague that after a year or two, we should be reassessing this. Because if we don't have to put additional financial pressures on our local businesses, I'd rather not do that. I think that there's a high need for education for both our residents, but as well as our contractors as well too. So I would really ask that happen. I do think, and you've kind of also answered it, but I do want to know, so what happens after this comes into place? Say we approve this and this comes into place, and there are contractors that continue to operate, but without a license. And, once again, you may catch wind of them or not. How do you follow up with them and make sure that there is an even playing field for those contractors who have done their due diligence and have acquired a license?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. And in these situations where contractors are unlicensed after they're required to be, it's a normal enforcement practice. We would respond to a complaint, we would deal with the contractor, provide the education piece, and an opportunity to license themselves. If they so choose not to, then we would deal with the enforcement side.
Okay. Well, I do hope that this is successful in not only creating that even playing field, educating our public, educating our local businesses, and making sure that everybody's adhering to our changes and our regulations, and making sure that people can still, beautify their properties in a way that they want to see. So thank you for all the hard work into this, and I have no further questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much to staff, not just for the work involved in preparing the report, but the extensive work in briefing councillors. I very much benefited from the 2 briefings that was made available to me prior to this meeting. So I am certainly in support of the licensing recommendation, not only because I believe, clearly this will be of benefit to protecting customers, i.e. protecting our residents, but also It will help support the good faith actors in the industry and help them remain competitive. And I am certainly sympathetic to the comments we had from the delegate, Mr. Gilman, and I'll have a question pertaining to that. But the other reason I'm really encouraged by this recommendation is not just the protections to residents and industry, but the protections to the citywide concern of having better stormwater management, particularly in our established areas where all kinds of infill development and other measures are wreaking havoc on on infiltration. So with that said, I have a few questions, largely motivated by the context provided by my colleagues, Councillor Johnson and Councillor Hill, talking about, we've heard the term Wild West being described, where there's certainly a lack of consistency among the industry. So my first question, with regards to the exemption for new builds, just so I'm clear, does that exemption apply even to one-off infill projects?
Mr. Chair, yes, we propose that it apply to any hardscaping occurring during the construction of any residential unit, recognizing council's priority to deliver new housing in the city. We propose that it apply to infill as well as new developments.
Okay, so with that in mind, so I'll safely assume that when we have new builds with a plan of subdivision, that there's going to be all kinds of contractors and subcontractors and inspections and agreements, but whether on an infill or whether on a plan of subdivision, knowing that the reason for granting the exemption is so that we can continue to support our housing goals, can you provide any information? Because we keep on talking about the numerous incidents of non-compliant hardscaping, but do you have, in part of your process that led to granting an exemption for new builds, whether infill or subdivision, do you have any data, any evidence to suggest whether or not there is a greater level of compliance with bylaw through new builds? Because I'm going to assume that in some new builds, just in some renovation projects, there are non-compliances.
Mr. Chair, that's a very good question. Based on the service requests and the enforcement data that we reviewed, hardscaping, non-compliant hardscaping in the construction for new homes was not the greatest area of concern. Appreciating that some councillors are seeing issues in their area on a one-off or case-by-case basis. Overall, that was not the greatest concern for the city. But I would invite my colleagues in bylaw to add comments to that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, really when it comes to sort of infill housing or new construction, when an individual applies for this building permit, the plans are examined by a plans examiner. At that point, there are inspections that are completed throughout the process of the new build. And for the most part, in these situations, we do see compliance. And this is not an area for concern really when it comes to enforcement for bylaw for new builds or for developments.
Okay, and just so I understand, so if I'm a hardscaping, so if I'm a general contractor on an infill, and let's say I'm subcontracting at the hardscaping, and just on a one-off infill, it sounds like that means I don't need to, as the general contractor, I might not need to hire a licensed subcontractor for that hardscaping. But because I have examples of infill development in my ward where the driveway is extra wide, way out of compliance with bylaw. So if that is the case, we're on an infill development, the general contractor, let's say, doesn't need to hire a licensed hardscaper, and if that driveway ends up being non-compliant, what enforcement measures do we have to not just to get the driveway back in compliance, but to try to prevent that kind of instance from happening again?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. In these situations, Councillor, where it's going to be an infill. The property is already in non-compliance. We would hope that through the plans examination that this would be addressed and caught at that time. If not, and there was a complaint received, bylaw would attend and investigate as it normally would. And as we previously indicated, depending on the circumstances in that front yard, would gear how we approach the enforcement.
Okay. Going back to what you were saying earlier, that the reason for granting the exemption on new builds is to get more housing. Can I assume that if all we're seeing is, okay, you know what? Actually, I'm not going to ask that question because I think I know the answer. But I would like to move on. If we're granting, I appreciate, as Councillor Luloff was saying, I appreciate granting the exemption to snowplow contractors because quite often we're going to have, one company that does snowplow in the winter and hardscaping in the summer. But assuming that to grant or to get a license as a hardscaper, there needs to be some level of education or swearing off on compliance measures to get that license. Will we be expecting the same level of, for lack of a better term, training and or education for someone who is a licensed snowplow contractor to be able to act as a licensed hardscaper?
Mr. Chair, I may not be answering exactly what the councillor is asking, so appreciate any follow-ups, but yes, so whether it's an applicant for a snowplow contractor license or an applicant for a hardscape contractor license, the application process remains the same. They have to fill all the conditions of issuance in order to obtain a license. As part of the conditions of holding a license and renewing a license, they have to comply with all city bylaws. If there are issues of non-compliance, especially repeated non-compliance, that is something that the chief license inspector can take into account, either in the term or at renewal. So I will turn it over to bylaw staff to add any details on that.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. And sorry, Councillor, if I can just get you to repeat your question just so that I fully understand at this point.
Well, and now that I heard that from Ms. Bielo, I think I can rephrase it. So if I am a snowplow contractor and I've paid a license for my snowplow license, I don't need to pay an additional license for the hardscaping aspect of my business. But if I am doing non-compliant work on hardscaping as a licensed snow contractor, when it comes time for my license renewal, I'm renewing my snowplow license, not my hardscaping license. Can non-compliant hardscaping work have an impact on my ability to renew my snowplow license?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. So I think, the simple answer is yes, it could, because all applicants, they must comply with all city bylaws. So that would include all license. So if you're licensed in multiple categories, it's important that you're complying with all licensing bylaw regimes that we have in place. But, to further add to that question, it's one of the things that we did consider here is that often when we look at a licensing regime and we look at the fees that we're going to charge for the license, it's really about the cost recovery on enforcement and administration costs. So again, Valerie and I had many discussions about this, that we're really anticipating that there's going to be a substantial decrease in the amount of service requests that we have to handle on an annual basis because of this licensing regime. So education is going to be a key component here. So we're not looking for any additional revenues to offset those costs, other than, we know that for the first couple of years, we're going to be chasing some contractors, and we're going to use, our summer student program to assist with more focused enforcement in that area. So that's what those licensing fees will be used for.
Thank you. So, hey, one last question in reference to the delegation from the young man who was talking about small businesses trying to find their way. I agree that we don't necessarily want to exempt them from having a license here, but I guess one measure I wanted to ask, if it is in our best interest to make sure that we can support entrepreneurs and that there can be, turnover of getting these young businesses to find their way, has there been any consideration, or could there be any kind of consideration of perhaps having a limited amount of discounted licenses available to qualifying small business entrepreneurs, whether they be young or new Canadian or whatever, provided that they find compliance through some other ways, like a discounted license tied with mandatory education, so that they could be compliant, just so we can not disincentivize young businesses from starting up.
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. I think this goes back to a question that was asked earlier. Again, it's difficult for a person under the age of 18 to meet the requirements to issue a license, so the requirements of issuance.
And I didn't mean, sorry, not for people under 18. Let's say it's a small business. They've got $300,000 in annual sales. They've got 2 trucks, or a group of new Canadians who are finding it hard to meet the larger licensing requirements. I'm talking specifically about those small businesses that might not be able to compete with large ones. Is there any way of offering some kind of discount to them that goes along with education?
Mr. Chair, that's not something that we had considered during this process. It would be a bit of an administrative burden to be able to do that. It's again, we've kept this licensing fee as low as possible because we're encouraging compliance. We want the contractors to come in and get their business license. Again, this licensing fee legitimizes their business. We're with the web page that we have on ottawa.ca, we list all the licensed contractors. So again, this is an opportunity for residents to go on a web page and see, which contractors, when they're selecting contractors, which one of them are licensed, so that they can ensure, for consumer protection, they can ensure that, this contractor is licensed and is going to have a contract, and they're going to provide me all the information, and they know the bylaws, and they're going to follow the bylaws. And so there's less risk for the residents. And I think that, again, it's a nominal fee. There is a cost to enforcement and administration. And that's, after doing the assessment, these are the fees that we need to cover those costs.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Any other questions from committee members? Okay, I'll just offer a few thoughts from myself. So a number of colleagues provided examples of within their own wards of non-compliance. And I've got to say, in my experience, these are very volatile, emotional conversations to have with residents, because they've just spent $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to make hardscaping improvements to their property, and they didn't know it wasn't permitted, or it doesn't conform until a bylaw officer shows up, because someone has raised this with bylaw. And they want their local councillor to be the arbitrator of this disagreement. And that's not really our role. Our role is to provide, a shoulder to lean on, to listen to their concerns. But at the end of the day, my frustrations are there are contractors out there that simply want to do the job. And their number one priority should be to inform their prospective client what is and is not permitted. And let's talk about what is permitted. Let's talk about how we can design your property in the confines about what is legal per our bylaws. So we have a number of contractors who simply aren't playing by the rules, and it's costing everyone money. There's a cost to taxpayers to have our staff go out there multiple times, and it doesn't create happiness. It creates a lot of ill will with residents who are having to remediate their properties. So I do want to see a licensing regime, but I also want to see punishment for people who don't play by the rules. And right now it's civil litigation between the resident, the property owner, and these companies. And so one way is we will be able to publish on ottawa.ca a list of all licensed contractors that have gone through the city. That doesn't mean there won't be any issues going forward with work, but at least we'll be able to weed out people who will be licensed versus those who won't, similar to other industries like snow operations. And to Councillor Hill's point is once this takes foot and other bylaws come into place, there's an opportunity a few years from now to see how things are going and to report back through this committee. So there are just way too many examples across the city in multiple wards for us not to take action. We thank staff for the work that they've done in this regard, and I hope that the committee and ultimately council will approve the revisions to this bylaw. So thank you to staff for this work. So the recommendation before us now is that this committee recommend that council approve amendments to the licensing bylaw number 2002-189 as amended to establish regulations for the licensing of hardscaping contractors as described in this report and in the general form as set out in document 1. Is this matter carried?
Carried.
Thank you. The dissent is noted. We have dealt with item 6.1. Item 7 is in-camera items. I'm not aware of any in-camera items. Item 8 is notices of motion, and we do have some notices. So I'll start with Councillor Dudas first, and then Councillor Bradley. Councillor Dudas.
Chair, whereas the City of Ottawa's bylaw review work plan identifies regulatory bylaws for review or development each term of council. And whereas the feeding of wildlife, particularly mammalian wildlife, can result in animals becoming dependent on humans for food, disrupting their natural foraging behavior, increased risk of disease transmission among animals and between animals and humans, wildlife becoming more aggressive or losing their natural fear of people, leading to safety concerns, unattended attraction of rodents such as rats and mice, and where control bylaw currently addresses domestic animals, but does not specifically regulate the feeding of wildlife. Whereas other Ontario municipalities, including Toronto, have recently introduced bans on wildlife feeding with regulated exceptions for birds, fishing, research, animal control, and cultural practices. Therefore, it be resolved that staff include a wildlife feeding bylaw or amendments to the animal care and control bylaw concerning the feeding of wildlife as an item for consideration as part of the development of next term of council's bylaw review work plan to be approved by council, and that other jurisdictions be considered as models as part of this work.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. So that is a notice of motion. And Councillor Bradley, I believe you have a notice as well.
I do. Thank you, Chair. We'll read it in now. Whereas Schedule 2 of the City of Ottawa's Licensing Bylaw 2002-189 as amended licenses and regulates driving school operators and driving instructors. And whereas in 2011 by motion, Council amended Schedule 2 to prohibit driving instruction within a defined area adjacent to the Ministry of Transportation Drive Test Facility at 1570 Walkley Road to address ongoing issues with increased traffic and potential safety concerns in the residential area adjacent to the test facility. And whereas the Ministry of Transportation has expanded its test route and therefore requested a corresponding expansion of the prohibited area. And whereas given continued safety considerations and concerns expressed by community in this regard, city staff support restricting driving instruction in the expanded test route. Therefore, be it resolved that council approve amendments to Schedule 2 of Licensing Bylaw 2002-189 as amended, as detailed in the attached amending bylaw to prohibit driving instruction within the defined area adjacent to the Ministry of Transportation Drive Test Facility at 1570 Walkley Road.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bradley. Are there any other notices? Seeing none, as the purpose of our November meeting will be to focus on the committee's portion of the 2026 budget, the City Clerk's Office has prepared a waiver motion to have both notices of motion considered at the next committee meeting, which is scheduled for February of 2026. And Councillor Vice Chair Hill, has the waiver motion prepared.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Be it resolved that the following subsection of the procedure bylaw 2025-100 be waived to allow notices of motion introduced at today's meeting to rise to the February 2026 EPPSC meeting, as the November 20th, 2025 meeting will be focused on the 2026 draft budget. 59.4, consideration of a motion of which notice was given pursuant to this section shall be in order at the next regular meeting or at a special meeting of council called for that purpose.
So this is just a procedural motion that will move both of those motions to our next regular meeting following the budget, which is in February. And that has to be approved. Yes, okay. So does the committee approve that? All right, thank you. Okay, seeing that there are no other notices, item 9 is inquiries, and I believe Vice Chair Hill has one. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Inquiry regarding Ottawa Public Health and bylaw dog bite coordination. Dog bites are a rare occurrence, but when they happen, residents can be confused as to who to contact, as both Ottawa Public Health and bylaw services have web pages requesting incidents be reported through their respective organizations. The overwhelming majority of dog owners are responsible people, and complaints may be overwhelming may be motivated to reach out to OPH to report a public health concern, but avoid reaching out to bylaw to prevent escalation of consequences to the dog. Or they may be instructed by a doctor fixing their wounds to call OPH and a police officer to take care of their case to contact bylaw. With that in mind, could you please address the following questions? 1, currently OPH requests dog bite victims to contact their organization to help coordinate rabies response. To what extent does bylaw services and OPH share information on dog bite reports, both at the macro and individual case level? 2, what role, if any, does bylaw play in enforcement of OPH's rabies quarantine and inspections when implemented? 3, how many dog bites reported over the last 5 years have been rabies related? And 4, how many muzzle orders are successfully appealed? And what are the common factors in a successful appeal?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Are there any other inquiries? Seeing none, item 10 is other business. And as I said at the beginning of our meeting, this is when we'll deal with a motion that I have. So I'm going to step out of the chair to read the motions and ask that the Vice Chair take the chair position.
Okay, thank you. So the committee recognizes Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. So colleagues, I motion today that I would like us to consider. It is timely, and as for us as the City of Ottawa to support the establishment of a National Fire Administration. I do believe that before, Chair, that this motion goes forward, that we have to deal with the rules of procedure. There is a motion that the rules of procedure be waived to allow for the consideration of this motion by the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee at today's meeting and by Council at its meeting of October 22nd, 2025, regarding the establishment of the National Fire Administration. So I'll just ask if I have support of the committee.
Supported.
All right, thank you. Okay, and perhaps if Chief Hutt, do you want to come up to the front? Thank you, Chief. So colleagues, I'm not going to read the entire motion. It was circulated in advance. But for those who, members of the public, I will say that as the title of this motion indicates, City of Ottawa support the establishment of a National Fire Administration. The goal would be to see this established within Public Safety Canada and developed in collaboration with Canada's fire chiefs, would serve as a coordinating mechanism for policy and decision-making on technical fire and emergency management matters without impinging on provincial or territorial jurisdictions. And what came to light for me was seeing multiple provinces struggle this past summer with forest fires in particular, the difficulty of coordination of resources, and how a national fire administration would benefit the country as a whole. This is something that fire chiefs are advocating for. There's a private member's bill in federal parliament right now. And it's something that I feel strongly about. Obviously, very large forested area within the City of Ottawa. We're not immune ourselves to these types of emergencies. So the motion, the action items are that be it resolved that the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee recommend Council express its support for the establishment of a National Fire Administration within Public Safety Canada. And it's been modified from the original copy to include the words headquartered in Ottawa, developed in collaboration with Canada's fire chiefs, And the second clause is be it resolved that the city clerk be directed to share a copy of this motion with the minister, federal minister of public safety on behalf of city council. And that's Minister Aned Shinangari, who leads that portfolio. So thank you, Chief Hutt, for being here today. I was wondering if you could provide comment on this motion.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for this consideration today. The Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs have been asking for a fire administration position. We're seeing across the nation more and more, environmental events, extreme weather events. We do have, through the province of Ontario, a coordinated approach. When it comes to a national approach, we feel that there's lacking that strategic coordination across from coast to coast to coast. Essentially, this will just modernize how we look at it from a response perspective from across. So there is a private member's bill before, I believe the Senate now, or contemplating this, and there is a petition. So I am a member of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. I do believe this would help from an overwide national response. And it's not even a response, it's also the prevention, education, sharing of information. Other countries, United States, Japan, Australia, they have fire administrations from a national perspective, and they've proven to be very proficient and successful in those countries as well. So thank you for this motion before committee today.
Great. Thank you for that. And Chair, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington, for bringing that forward. Does anybody have any questions? I see Councillor DesRoches.
Thanks, Vice Chair. No, I just wanted to thank Councillor Brockington for bringing this forward and accepting a friendly amendment to include that it should be headquartered in Ottawa. Every now and then as a council, we have to put on our national capital cape and defend the nation's capital. This is the capital city under the Constitution, and there are very much political forces out there that would have what are machinery of government jobs going to the regions. But if this is truly a national program, a national service, then it should be headquartered in the city of Ottawa. So I appreciate your friendliness in accepting that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor DesRoches. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. So could you just offer some examples of what this service would do to augment your service at a local level that you think would be best captured through a national body?
Chair, through you, thank you for that question. We see at a provincial level, for example, and I'll just start with the provincial level, if assistance is required across the province, the province will reach out through emergency management and notify municipalities to see what resources, what equipment, how we can support. At a national level, we don't have that. So if you apply the same methodology or the same strategic planning, we're not, certainly from the fire chief's perspective, emergency management, it's just there is no central area of coordination for a national response. For example, the wildfires in California, we were notified to the province that we could support at a federal level, but there was a disconnect between, I felt there was a disconnect between the province and then the federal level. So if you had that fire administrator, that one point of contact that, if we were able to support or could help with resources or equipment, you would have that the continuity between those agencies. And this is what that administration would focus on.
Thank you very much. I can certainly see many examples of where we're starting to see more, the size and scale of the disaster is requiring more hands on deck more quickly. And so I can appreciate how this would be helpful. I mean, just with respect, I know it's a little off topic, but with the provincial oversight, like how does it work with fire bans in that, even sometimes some of the more rural communities around Ottawa would not have a fire ban, but Ottawa might have a fire ban or vice versa. Is someone coordinating that, on a regional level, and are there still some gaps even in that type of enforcement?
Thank you. I think it's a very relevant question. There is coordination from a provincial perspective. There's a provincial Ministry of Natural Resources. So when they identify fire danger, fire hazard, we certainly take a very close look at their characteristics and we apply that same methodology here in Ottawa. What is unique is that the province of Ontario is huge. So what could be occurring in one part of the province may not be the same in another part. And so even though we follow provincial guidelines and regulations, we do have to take a look at it from a local aspect as well. As we speak, we're in a level 3 drought. So, those are things that we're always taking into consideration when we're looking at our fire bans. It might also too, when we look at fire bans and fire danger in our community, we often get questioned, we just got some rain and why can't we burn? But we have to take was it enough rain to make a significant difference in the dry tinder that we have in our area? So there's a lot of moving pieces behind the scene, but if you're absolutely correct. There is some framework through the Provincial Ministry of Natural Resources that we take into consideration.
And so how with a national body like this perhaps you have examples from the other countries that are doing it, but when it comes to specific high risk situations at a local level that would require some perhaps foresight as to what kinds of services and equipment you might need here, are you able to sort of weigh those options when getting pulled into other areas and other jurisdictions that might have other requirements? Like, you'll always maintain a certain degree of local accountability for regional conditions versus being pulled in a national way.
Thank you, Chair. The establishment of a national fire administrator isn't to take away from local jurisdiction or provincial jurisdiction. What it is it's a single path of conduit or information that, in the event that we have resources or equipment, and we've seen this in Canada today, where we're seeing groups from other nations come and support wildland firefighting, for example, where there's resources and equipment that are closer right in Canada that can support with some of those initiatives. And again, I'm not suggesting it's being overlooked, but I just don't think there's a strong coordination from a national perspective.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Is there any further debate on this issue? Thank you, Councillor Brockington, for bringing this forward. Is this motion carried? Perfect. Councillor Brockington, you want to take the chair?
Take the chair back, but I'm going to sit here to adjourn our meeting. So colleagues, our next meeting will be November 20th. That will be the budget meeting. We'll deal with the budget exclusively. And as there's no other business today, we are now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.